In a Violent Nature might be the most boring movie I've ever seen, and even calling this thing a movie is more justice than it deserves. It is a padded out snooze fest. Seriously, even the One Piece anime is less dragged out than this shit. But it's not entirely without its merits, so let's get into why this movie is the worst of 2024 and what it could have done better. The opening is atmospheric. The decision to forego music outside of a few instances where there is an actual in universe radio of some kind playing, it really stands out. Instead, you have a lot of crunching footsteps, crackling fires, whispering winds, or the bird song of nature. It does set a great atmosphere, and I do like the creative decision to go this route. But the problems also start early on. This locket, it's the core of the movie, really. It's the obsession of the killer, but how is it holding our killer in place? It's not really explained. For now, it's just looped over this metal pole that's stuck in the ground. The pole isn't even that deep either. Why is the killer's seal that, you know, it's holding back this super deadly, unstoppable zombie super soldier? It's just out in the open. Well, not even really the open, that which would be even better because good luck finding this random necklace in this massive patch of forest. No, it's in some old, decrepit, burnt down remains of a fire station, which sticks out like a sore thumb and it's just screaming to be explored. Why isn't this hut encased in concrete? Why isn't the floor covered with concrete or something? Nor is the killer buried in a stone coffin or seemingly anything at all, just a very shallow dirt grave that's now covered in some leaves. I think he has some chains around him. I mean, you see some chains fall off him when he stands up, but they didn't look like they were around his legs or hands or anything. They just fall down. He doesn't even do anything to get them off. It's a great trap for the killer. I'm sure he won't ever get out in return. Oh, but he has already. 10 years ago, he went on a second rampage. Which they really are setting up a lot of fucking prequels with this terrible movie. And then starts the walking. You have to get used to this shit because it's a huge portion of the movie. The camera is positioned behind the killer, right over his shoulder, and the killer tramps through the scenery with very heavy footfalls and nothing else really going on. He does this for several minutes at a time. It also really doesn't help when they do have these long one take parts, but then there's a random cut and the killer skips forward a few seconds. Yet you're still having multiple of these minute long walking scenes throughout the movie, and you're having to skip through them as well. It's especially jarring when there's a conversation going on in the background and footage just skips ahead 20 seconds. The killer is now just 20 meters further along the path, but the conversation itself hasn't missed a single beat. Even you, the director, Chris, you realized this walking shit was boring and drawn out, but you kept it in the movie. Why? Seriously, a quarter feels more like half of this movie, at least, is just the killer walking through the woods or a field. It's fucking terrible. Speaking of the killer, they're your generic person that died tragically and now they've turned into a super soldier zombie. They're unstoppable, they're mute, they're superhuman. They're a real rip-off of Jason and Michael Myers, and I'm sure myriad other slasher killers. There's even a big face reveal halfway through the movie after they take great care not to show his face for the first half of the movie, always having it the camera positioned behind him, or when it is front facing, he's shrouded in darkness from a heavy light source behind him, or he's just wearing a mask. But then the face reveal happens and it's just flat. It doesn't really do anything. It brings up even more questions because from the killer's eyes, they're very cloudy and colorless and he looks blind, but never has any problem seeing people. Even the dialogue has its issues. Some of the dialogue in this movie is just plain exposition or unnecessary. The opening, sure, it has some good vague hints of the White Pine slaughter, which is a good setup, but they blow their load with it too early on. Then, the second conversation of the movie, again, you set up and introduce the local park ranger. He has some history with these murders. It's pretty good. You also establish that there's this dumb hillbilly hick who exists solely to be the first murder victim. And it tells us that he is the one setting up traps in the forest, which will be important later. But then we jump right into a brief flashback. And it's just a complete dump of, well, here's what the locket is and why it's important to our killer, our little Johnny. Just to remind you that he'll always be his daddy's little boy. I'm glad we got that out of the way within the first 5 minutes of the movie, and there goes all the intrigue as to why the necklace is important. But some dialogue can be good. There can be subtlety and good, succinct writing, seemingly when Chris actually puts the effort in. Sometimes backstory and information is revealed in ways that feel organic and real rather than heavy-handed like this flashback with the necklace. When we hear Troy, our antagonist of the survivors and the biggest asshole amongst them, yell at Colt, the outcast in these survivors, revealing that he's mad at Colt for being a downer on this party because Colt's dad died recently. It's a good organic way to reveal that information to us, and also the mention of a dead dad and someone using that as a sort of pseudo-insult enrages the nearby killer and snaps him out of his happy little playtime he was having with a toy car. Though, of course, because the characters are still just really fucking shit, the killer is playing with that toy car on a keychain because Troy just launched those keys into the woods to stop Colt from leaving and telling the police or the park ranger that some of their friends are missing, even though they have keys to some bikes right there, and it doesn't stop Colt at all. Which does lead into some of the decisions in this movie that are just terrible. Aside from creative decisions, just the in-character decisions. Every character in this movie seems to make the absolute worst decision possible. They make decisions like they don't have an actual functioning brain. And also, they can't outrun this stupid fucking killer who does the classic Terminator or Michael Myers walk and is incapable of running themselves. Literally, if someone just speed walked, they'd be twice as fast as the fucking fat, bald snail that is after them. And the chase scenes, the few that are actually in this movie, very exhilarating, I gotta tell you, when the killer just walks along and there's no music. You know how the score in Halloween, that iconic track, adds to every single chase scene? Yeah, there's none of that in this. But back to the horrible decision making. It starts with this retarded hillbilly hearing someone in his home. He thinks it's the ranger, of course, because he just had an argument with this guy. But before he even sees who it is, he just shoots his bolt-action rifle into the ground, into the wall. I'm not even sure where he shoots it, but it wasn't at the fucking killer, that's for sure. Because he's standing in a completely different room from the person that's in his house. Then, when the hillbilly does need to run away, he runs into the trap-ridden forest instead of to his car that's right there, or even to the main road, which is also right there, or anywhere else. As I said, the killer just fucking walks. These fucking retards also, later, they know that Johnny can't die. The killer, he's a zombie. Superhuman, regenerating, I don't know. He can't die. They know this. The park ranger knows this. And there is a point in the movie later on where they're standing right over the killer's prone body, directly over it. They're already easily within swiping range. They know he's not dead, but they want to chain him up. No, of course, one of them is a pussy fucking faggot. He needs to cry about, no, I can't chain him up. I just can't do it. So the ranger is like, okay, I'll do it. But you take the gun. Because surely this fucking bitch that can't tie him up is definitely going to be able to pull the trigger. Okay? But they're going to hand over the gun. They discuss this very loudly and right next to the killer. They also go one step further and just count down to when they're going to take their hands off the gun and hand it over to someone else. 3, 2, 1. Oh, and could you guess what fucking happens? Obviously, the killer swats the gun away and then kills them. Shocking. I can't explain this enough that the killer can only fucking walk. Briskly at most. Sometimes he does walk with a bit more urgency. But no one ever fucking runs. They have cars, they have trucks, they have fucking quad bike ATVs, for fuck's sake. There's an instance where these people take the bikes and go to the ranger's office, which is miles away from their cabins in the woods. And somehow good old Johnny Walker gets there about a minute after they've arrived, from what we can assume based on the conversation that the survivors are having with the ranger. Speaking of the survivors and the ranger, the characters are lame and shallow, if they exist at all. The most we get of them is that one Troy, a boyfriend to another character, Chris, and he's just an absolute douche. That's all his character is, really. He's completely antagonistic to everyone else and is always trying to start a fight for no fucking reason. Other than that, the rest are simply just murder fodder. They are bland, soulless young people that are only there to be brutally eviscerated, and the movie doesn't even pretend like they're anything else. At least you could have made them all assholes like Troy, so we can just root for the killer and hope with excitement for these brutal death scenes, but no, even that's too hard. Perhaps there's too many of them. Maybe that's the problem. The main cast has about 8 friends in total, which does give you plenty of kill scenes, but you never spend any time fleshing them out before then. Which maybe you could have, instead of padding out the runtime with walking scenes over and over. Now, Johnny does have a tragic backstory, of course, the killer, Johnny. And this history of that White Pine slaughter. They do just tell you about it about 20 minutes into the movie, in the context of a spooky story that's told around a campfire by one of the survivors. The story is that Johnny was a slow child, a retard. And there were lots of loggers in this forest, and his father set up some stores and sold these loggers a bunch of things. He gave them food, cigarettes, whatever, and gouged the prices heavily. Now, these loggers didn't really like Johnny's father that much and took it out on Johnny instead, picking on him, bullying him, that sort of things. And one day, They lured him up the fire tower and they scared him. And they caused Johnny to fall off the fire tower and he broke his neck, dying instantly. They tried to cover up the body and make it look like an accident. But a day later, the father confronted them all and got into a fight with these loggers, and they killed the father too. Then you have, a week after that, the slaughter happens, and all those loggers end up dead. All except one of them that gets away. And somehow, Johnny's the one who did this, but as the story is told, Johnny is a child when he dies. He's playing with toy trucks and shit. But apparently that child is a fucking 6-foot-tall behemoth. And this all supposedly happened, I think they say 60 years ago. A long time ago. Then there's a part about an hour in, when we get to the park ranger, who is the son of that single survivor from the first slaughter. And he talks about the second slaughter. And he says that the second slaughter happened 10 years later, when Johnny got back up and went round the park and killed everyone again, except I think he means to say 10 years ago. From everything we've heard previously mentioned, 10 years ago was when the second slaughter happened. So, unless the first slaughter happened 20 years ago, which the ranger is saying, then the original campfire story's off by 50 fucking years, or the ranger just said the wrong line and they kept it in the fucking movie. I don't know what's happening there. It's just another inconsistency that shows these people really didn't care when it came down to the writing of the movie. But okay, I think I've harped on how bad it is. Enough for now. I did say that it had some merits, and let me get to those. The gore and the kills in this movie are spectacular. Now, aside from the first kill being wasted off screen, I hear that's a trope in these kind of movies, but anyway, it's a bit of a disappointment. The second kill is one for the ages, and kicks off what can be a lovely extravaganza of gore and practical effects, which are top-notch, and the best part of the movie by far. Like, if there's one thing to take away from this movie, it's that it's bound to show you at least one crazy kill you've never even imagined possible. But after that spectacular second kill, we're straight back into a long-ass walking sequence, instead of doing anything to develop the plot of the characters. It's just unnecessary padding again. I can't emphasize this enough. It's actually ridiculous, especially with how this movie barely manages to scrape past a 90-minute runtime. You know, some of that time could have been given to the characters and had maybe given them some actual depth if you needed to fill out those 90 minutes, instead of just shooting another 5-minute long scene of the killer walking. But as great as the kills are, even the best kill in the movie doesn't come without its problems. Whilst this kill is amazing and unlike anything I've ever seen before, with another incredible display of practical effects, like, for fuck's sake, Chris just needs to stick to making practical effects for, like, other movies. He's not a director or a writer, okay? He just needs to stick to those practical effects, because that he is a master of those. But back to the problems of this incredible kill, this fucking pretzel, like, kill. Like, I don't even know, fishhook pretzel, like, it's unbelievable. Go look it up, maybe search for quarry kill or something. But the acting during this scene is weak. Granted, the killer is now masked, and they've always been stoic and faceless before this, but the victim, she just accepts it, and then nothing. It's a drawn-out kill with a heavy first blow, but not a first blow that would kill her instantly. I assume that she's in a state of shock, but even that doesn't really come across. It's just more like she's empty. Like, as soon as the killer got his hands on her, she just became an empty doll. A prop for him to use in his bloody, over-the-top art. And this problem does carry over to another kill in this movie. And of course, after the kill, we need to walk it off and spend another couple minutes just following the killer through the woods. And back to the horrible gun handover scene, back to that fiasco. We get perhaps the longest kill in cinema history, maybe? Unless you count the first Saw movie in its entirety as a kill, I guess. It is the worst kill in the movie, at least. It starts with crippling the ranger, paralyzing him by breaking through his back and snapping his spine with the killer's bare hand. But it paralyzes him completely, not just from the waist down or anything, or even the neck down. It's all over, like, can't even talk kind of paralyzed. So again, we now just have a prop, a dummy full of blood and guts for the killer to mutilate. The ranger can't express any fear, they can't talk or even scream, and they can't even fucking react to what's happening with them. So now we have to watch as Johnny walks into a shed. He turns on some kind of machine. We can't see it yet. Apparently it's some kind of automatic log splitter contraption. Then Johnny walks back. He slowly drags the ranger into the shed. He demonstrates the slow process of the machine and its axe head splitting a log in half. Then he sets the ranger up. He cuts off the ranger's arm. Blood gushes out, but the ranger can't even react to this. Can't even fucking flinch. Then again, he rearranges the ranger, positions them differently, and slowly starts the machine again and cuts his head off. It takes nearly 6 minutes from the moment the ranger is paralyzed to his head being chopped off. There is no emotion from either killer or victim during this. No dialogue. Nothing. Just the sound of the rumbling machine. Speaking of sound, let's get back to another upside for the movie, possibly. Look, the sound design is good. The impacts of the kills are the brutal, meaty. The atmosphere is good with all the sounds of nature. It's wonderful. But the volume of things is inconsistent, maybe. Or maybe everyone has terrible hearing. The killer is always off in the distance. And because we're with his perspective the whole time, always right on his shoulder or just behind him, yet we can hear every conversation perfectly clear. Everything's nice and loud. But you know what else we can hear perfectly clear and very loudly? This giant fucking oaf stomping around everywhere. He's not quiet. He's not stealthy. It's a fucking forest. There are leaves all over the ground crunching with every step. And yet, no one ever fucking hears him. Oh, there is one time he steps on a twig, which is still only about as loud as every other step that he's ever taken in the entire movie. And someone does turn around this time, but they still die, making the twig redundant. And after all that, you'd think we'd have already had the worst scene. You know, that drawn-out kill with the log splitter, perhaps. Or there was even a drowning kill where you're basically just watching nothing happen for 5 minutes as the killer silently drowns someone. You don't even really see a struggle with them or anything. Or, you know, pick your poison of any of the dozen walking scenes within the movie. But no. Now we reach the real worst scene in the movie. It starts with our final 2 victims, Colt, who we've discussed before, and our heroine, Chris, with a K. She's a girl. Really, though? I mean, naming one of your main characters and you give them your own name? Fucking hell. But other than her name, I can barely tell you anything about her. Except that she was somehow in a relationship with Troy, even though he doesn't display a single good quality throughout his time on screen. and is in fact one of the biggest assholes ever for no fucking reason. But she's also Colt's friend and the one who brought him along. That's her character. That's everything we know about her. How old is she? What does she do for a living? What's her family situation like? Who she is as a person? Don't fucking know. Now, while Johnny had that long, lovely wood splitter kill with the ranger, these two fuckers, Colt and Chris, ran off, leaving the ranger to die. Though he did tell them to do that, so... But I digress. The ranger had a truck, by the way. They didn't use it. But now they're in the woods. You'd think with that, 10-minute head start on Johnny, and with him only being able to walk, they'd get away with ease. You can just keep jogging at a pretty leisurely pace. But, no, they're waiting for him. They're hiding. But then they call out to him. Okay. And then Colt sets himself up for a noble sacrifice, saying, "Oh, I have to distract him." Meanwhile, Colt and Chris are hiding and whispering to one another. But even though the killer is 20 yards away, we and he can hear them like they're shouting into our and his ears. Colt explains the entire fucking plan because they just love shouting their plans right into the killer's ears for some reason. Of leading Johnny to the fire tower, the decrepit old hut from the beginning, and setting off a trap to finally put a stop to this monstrous killer and putting him back in the ground for good. So what's Colt's master plan? Well, somehow he circles around the killer, then he walks right up behind him and shouts, "Come on, you ugly son of a bitch, we're right here," before Johnny whirls around and slams an axe into his face, because Colt walked directly behind him, about a foot away. And then Johnny just keeps smashing Colt's brains out with that axe about 50 times. Yep, that's how Colt dies. And Chris, meanwhile, is just standing there, now out in the open, watching the killer turn Colt's face into mincemeat. This shit is... It's fucking terrible. Even a B movie wouldn't stoop to something as retarded as this. And again, it's just like Troy, this guy Troy, he was an asshole, but his death was super underwhelming. One guy gets his head sawn into through the fucking mouth, and we watch that for a full minute. This random chick gets turned into a pretzel for a couple of minutes with a giant hook in her head. But Troy, the biggest asshole, the one who stole the locket in the first place, he just gets his head crushed by a rock. Boom. All over in 2 seconds. He even made fun of someone's dead dad. But no, he's destroyed immediately, and every other fucking rando, they've done literally nothing to Johnny. They get brutalized for 5 minutes each. So much so that in this moment where Johnny is smashing Colt's brains to mush, he seemingly forgets all about that locket, all about his obsession, even though he fucking saw it on Chris's neck just before. But no, instead of chasing after her or even giving a single fuck about her or even acknowledging her existence, he's just got to smash Colt's brains into the dirt over and over and over. And Chris just stands there watching like a retarded cunt. Thankfully, the plot demands Chris actually does something now, so she leaves the necklace behind and finally runs away after a minute of watching her friend get pulverized. After that fucking mess, we get something completely different and out of left field for this movie. We finally leave the perspective of the killer, and we get something that's actually terrifying, tense, and haunting. Chris runs away through the shadowed woods. Moonlight filters through dead, bare branches. It's the only light illuminating her and her path. All we hear is her panicked breathing, her rushed footfalls, the shrill cries of insects and birds, and the shrieks of tortured souls calling out for help. interspersed throughout all this is the sounds of the killer's grunts and his axe cleaving through Colt's brain. It is seared into her, traumatized her so deeply already that she is still hearing the sounds of that axe impacting with Colt's skull. The cuts are frequent, the camera is shaky as it follows Chris through her fearful flight, and we finally get some real emotion, some fucking terror from our now lead actress. Amidst the panic, she trips and impales her leg on the sharp end of a broken branch, now having to stumble and limp away towards what she hopes is salvation, all while she never knows where the killer is or if he's right behind her. A new dawn slowly rises on the woody wasteland, and she eventually comes to an old, destitute road. This is the most distressing sequence in the entire movie, and it doesn't end there. Not quite. She's on this road, an actual fucking road, but she has to continue her desperate escape. There's no telling where the killer is. He could be on the verge of breaking out of the forest and onto the road as well, still giving chase. As the camera is positioned behind Chris, there is no telling when the killer might stride forward and chase her down. It's a nice contrast to how we've always been positioned behind the killer for a majority of this film. Then, a car comes towards Chris. Salvation. It's very Texas Chainsaw Massacre of you movie. Then Chris gets in the truck, helped by a kind older woman. And you think things might end there, like they did in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but no, we've not even reached 80 minutes yet, so we do need to squeeze out some more runtime. And things get a bit weird. The scene is underscored by some strange old classical music. Again, it sounds royalty free, and it's not eerie enough to be disturbing, really. Chris lies and explains away her injuries and her terrible state by saying that she was running away from a wild animal. And this sparks the old lady to go on about another experience with a horrible animal attack, which had a similar bloody aftermath. This lady goes on and on about her brother, who encountered a bloodthirsty bear that had gone on a rampage and was killing wildlife left and right, but not eating them. Which then leads to some theory about henhouse disease or something like that, driving animals wild and making them kill and kill and kill without ever feeding. No rhyme or reason, because the animals don't need a reason to kill. Then, after that load of nonsense, Chris passes out from blood loss. Or maybe boredom. God knows I was passing out from boredom. But the old lady pulls over, needing to apply a tourniquet to Chris and stop that bleeding in her leg. Now, of course, they've stopped, and they're on the side of the road. They're still in the forest. It's right there. Johnny's out there, and Chris knows it. He could be anywhere. He could be watching right now. Again, we finally get some more tension and suspense in this movie. Chris looks deep into the cluttered shrubbery of the forest, searching between trees and bushes, searching for any sign of Johnny. And then we get some wide shots of nature. Quite nice, pretty images, but they suck the tension right out of the scene. And we end the movie with the last shot being back in the woods near that murder scene of Colt, where Chris had left the locket, but the locket is no longer there. And hey, we hit 90 minutes, so roll credits. Again, I'd just like to point out some other bad shit that was a little annoying. Speaking of underwhelming kills, there was a missed opportunity to do something cool, like some kind of underwater shot or something during the third kill of the movie, which again goes back to being zero gore, as it's just a drowning scene. I mean, the kills and the gore are the best part of this movie, so why is another kill technically happening off screen? I mean, we don't see anything. We don't see a struggle. We just see the surface of a very calm lake. And we don't see anything of the killer or the victim until her lifeless body resurfaces. But To end things off, I mean, the ending of the movie is just. You get the best scene of the movie with Chris running through the woods, but then you just get that car scene with the old lady, and it just slows shit down again and drags it out more. Like, we get this little taste of tension when the car stops, but then you do these random ass establishing shots of random nature. It just kills the entire moment. And the only two tense moments in the entire movie led to nothing. Chris doesn't die. She's the survivor. Wow, what a surprise. The virtuous, good female lives. She's the sole survivor. What a surprise. Overall, this movie, I don't even want to call it a fucking movie because it's so dragged out. We can barely reach 90 minutes even with all that fucking padding at the end. Even the ending is fucking dragged out for another 10 fucking minutes. The story is just shit. And even despite it being so terrible and having no ideas and no way to fill out the runtime of this fucking movie, they are just begging to make multiple prequels with this of the first slaughter and the second slaughter. They even have the goal to set up a potential sequel with this horse shit. Just please don't make this the next horror franchise because it's fucking terrible. Get this motherfucker Chris Nash on some other horror movie and let him be the lead effects guy, but just please do not put him behind a camera again. The characters are bland and terrible. The whole movie is boring. It is one of the most boring movies ever. There is not even an ounce of tension until the final dying spurts of this horseshit. And even then, it is squashed and padded out by worthless nonsense. Any of the few good qualities that can be found in this movie, the effects, the setting, the creativity, I like the concept. I like that you tried something different by shooting it from the killer's perspective for 90% of the film. The long single take shots. I admire what you were going for. The execution is just terrible, and it failed miserably. Even the good use of natural sound, it's just crushed underneath the mountain of flaws this movie has. This is legitimately one of the worst movies I've ever had the displeasure of watching. There are two enjoyable kills, which are just neat displays of gore, and they take up about 3 minutes of this 90-minute slog. That's what this is. It's a slog. It's a challenge to get through. Not because it's disturbing or stomach churning or horrific in any way. No. It's because it's so fucking boring.